Not even that's recording. It's recording.
Okay, great. Welcome to our Shiur on how to learn Torah. And what I've done for the last many years is studied some books by the great Rishonim and Achronim on how to learn Torah. So you'll say, why do you have to do that? Just sit down and learn. Okay? So the answer is because these great Gedolei Torah have paved the way for us for a clear understanding of what we're doing. And that's a great help. The Ramchal says things that would take many years of tremendous effort, he's going to give to you in a short summary. And you can say the same thing about these components. These concepts are concepts that are sometimes lost because we see the leaves and not the forest. You ever hear that phrase? I went to an ENT for a little minor things I had with my nose. So I went to an ENT, means ears, nose, and throat. He said, I'm sorry to inform you, but I'm really a throat and not a nose person. Today, things are becoming more and more specialized. Because people are doing iyum, they're able to see deeper and deeper into any subject. So the amount of people who are giving their time to that subject become less and less as the subject gets deeper and deeper. The Torah is quite a remarkable document. 3,300 years ago, there was a world universe. I said the whole universe shook when the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah. It was a revelation of his ratzon, his will in the world. And it changed the whole world, but more importantly, changed the Jewish people. It changed us from being a nation among nations to an Kodesh, a holy nation. And for those 3,300 years, the Jewish people have been spending their efforts to understand very precisely what the message is that the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to give us. And just like in the secular world, as you go deeper and deeper, fewer people are able to hold cup, to appreciate what's going on. So when it comes to the Torah, it also happens that when you get deeper and deeper into the Torah, you find fewer and fewer people able to have the information. But what's remarkable about the Torah is the following. Many things. But if I were to take you to my cousin's high-tech plant, where he has 5 black boxes in the space shuttle, and we went into the inner sanctums to where the engineers were creating these very advanced technological pieces of instrumentation. And I would sit there with you and listen to their discussion. I would guarantee neither you nor I would understand a single word of what they're talking about. Yet, when we look at the Torah, you go to a cheder, and there are these little children reading Chumash and understanding something. That is one of the biggest miracles and wonders in the world. How can the Kodesh Baruch Hu, who created science, who created technology, who created the whole world and the universe and so many things that we haven't even understood yet, how can he write a document that a little kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, really can understand? And what's more amazing is that same document is understood by the greatest Jewish minds throughout the generations, the Vilna Gaon. At the end of his life, what did he do? He read Chumash. But how did he read Chumash? Did he read Chumash like that 5-year-old or 6-year-old kid? He read Chumash in light of all the Torah Shabbat Peh that he had learned. It's a different Chumash. But the fact that that same document that could be read by a small child can be read by the greatest Jewish minds in the world, in the world of creation, is miraculous. How could we go into the class of the Kodesh Baruch Hu and understand a single word? It's wrong. If you think about it, it's a power. Yet, it's true. The little child learns something when he reads the Chumash, and the Vilna Gaon learns something again when he reads that same pasuk again. So the Torah is both accessible and very, very deep and very, very complex. And it's our job in the yeshiva to understand how to plumb the depths of that knowledge. Because that knowledge was given to us especially on Har Sinai. The Goyim have all the technology, all the physics, that's the knowledge that they were given. But we were given a special knowledge that they never will have. Chachma b'Goyim Tami, says Chazal. Wisdom of the Goyim, you could believe it, but Torah is not. They have no concept of what Torah knowledge is. It's our job in the yeshiva to understand Hashem's Ratzon and to understand His Torah. But it's a rather large and difficult task. It requires knowing a lot of information, the Tanakh, all of Shas. Now we can add the Torah, Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah, a lot of books out there, all telling us exactly what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants. So there's a lot of information. It's also, it requires the knowledge of 2 different languages, at least. We're speaking English, not required, but you have to know Hebrew, Vadai, Lashon Kodesh, and you have to know Aramaic. It also requires an analytical mind, because the Torah, although on the surface seems to be very simple, all the details come out of the Torah hanging on one word or one relationship or one hekesh. So you need a mind that can analyze and think. When the Birchus Shmuel said the bracha Shalom Asani Goy, who did he think of? Well, who do you think of? You think of the poor guy that's a street cleaner outside? You think about the guy that's building a building across the way? He thought about Aristotle. He thought about the highest accomplishment that any Goyish mind could create. Now you might pick someone else, Bill Gates, I don't know who you pick. But the point is that Shalom Asani Goy means the highest intellectual and moral level that any Goy could reach. For us, the Shalom Asani Goy. That's the base level. That's something, for us, is only a beginning. Of course you have to be moral. Of course you have to have an intellect. But when we approach the Torah is going to give us a new way of living. In every aspect, from the time we're born and have a bris milah, to the time after 120 where the alpha is put on our kettle. All that time in between, the Torah has very specific activities for us to do, and those are called mitzvahs. Now, how do we understand the specifics? So, the Rabbi Yitzchak Hanfiton lived right before Gerish Spar. He was called the Gaon of Castile. A tremendous, he also did, wondrous things, but he was tremendous Talmud Chacham. And not only that, he was a tremendous pedagogue. That means he was a teacher. And he was able to communicate the system of learning to his students in a very short and brief way, which is also quite remarkable. Because if I had to ask you how the Torah works, how the Talmud works, is that we'll keep reading and reading and reading, and eventually we'll figure it out. So he wrote a little book called Darkei Talmud, which later the censors didn't like the word Talmud, so they changed, they crossed that out word, they had it called now Darkei Gemara. Fine. But in this little book are gems of understanding the rules of the game. And if we understand these gems, then all of our learning that we're doing, all of a sudden has a mascara, has a framework. we're actually able to consciously understand what's going on. Now don't get me wrong, you can't learn this book and one day wake up, I'm the Vilna Gaon. It's not going to be that simple. But the difficulties that people have in understanding how the system works will be made clear to us. And that's a very, very important game. So in order to do this effectively, I'm taking little pieces of the book, that I normally don't like to do, but that's our time limitation, and I'm presenting it as it is, and then more importantly, I'm bringing to you a live example from the Gemara. And we're going to see those rules that are explained in this little sefer, how they actually are used in reality. So we'll have theory and practice come together. Okay? Now, we made a colorful chart. The first what I'm going to do is give you an overview through this outline that I made. Okay? So if you look on page 3, you have this colorful chart. Okay? This colorful chart is really just a diagram of what he's going to explain to us. So on the top part of the chart, it says, if I ask you, when the Torah wants to communicate its laws, how does it do it? So he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed his laws to us in two basic ways. One is called Mitzad HaKasuf, and the other one is called Mitzad HaSvar. Mitzad HaKasuf means that the Kodesh Baruch Hu wrote specifically on black and white, Lo Saseh, the Shabbos, Lo Saseh, Kol Malach. Black and white, on the Shabbos, don't do anything. That's black and white, it's written. The other one is called Svar. Svar means that your mind will take what's written and start making connections. So for instance, in our case, we have Arba Avos and Zika, right? The Shiur, the Bor, the Mav, and the Heaven. Those Arba Avos are clearly written in the Torah. The Torah writes about a Shiur doing damage, a Bor doing damage, a man doing damage, and fire doing damage. Those are the Pacific. But the Mishnah tells us that the law of the Arba Avos do not exist only in the case mentioned in the Chumash. We can expand that law to many other cases. Those are called what? Toldot. Toldot means they're children that come from the fathers. Now the way we get from what's written in the Torah to the Toldot is through a logical understanding. So for instance, Karen is written in the Torah, right? Ki yigach shor shorei. When a man's ox gores another man's ox, the owner has to pay. First Chetzi Nezek and then Nezek Shalom, correct? The first person. However, the Bryce explains to us what happens if an animal kicks another animal, or he squats down and crushes another animal. Are you obligated to pay? So it says yes. How do I know? That's a different case. Those cases are not mentioned in the Chumash at all. How do I get from what's mentioned in the Chumash to these cases which are not mentioned in the Chumash? The answer is the seichel is gozer. It must be true. There's a logical extension from understanding the case written in the Chumash to these cases. What's that logical link, that kesher? That's called Varahasik. When the Torah writes about the Karen, the case of Karen, it's not telling us a unique case. It's telling us a principal case. Karen represents when the animal has intent to do damage. Unlike when he eats, he doesn't have intent to do damage, he's just hungry, right? So that doesn't mean he has intent to do damage. The damage comes as a result of his hunger, right? Or when he walks, and he tramples on something. He doesn't want to trample on your nice suitcase, briefcase that you left in the street. He doesn't want to do it. It's just that he gets from A to B, he doesn't care about your suitcase. He doesn't understand anything about property rights and about suitcases at all. So that's called, he has Holei Kadarka. That's called Rebbe. But when he wants to do damage, he uses his horns. And that becomes a classical case of any time an animal wants to do damage, he has kavanah la'azeh, you won't have to pay. So from there we'll say, look, why did he kick? He had intent to do damage. So even though the Torah didn't write it, we can make a logical extension from the case that's given to that case and say you're also chayav. Okay, that's called a toledah, a logical extension. So the two basic ways that we're going to learn dinim is first what's written there in black and white. You got shore, when your shore hits another shore, you're going to have to pay the first time they move it. But the second way we're going to learn this din is through a logical extension, which we call a mametzin, or a bimini. We're going to say, what is the principle that is behind that case? The principle that the Torah is using is called kavanah la'azeh. He has intent to do damage, and therefore I can extend it to any case where the animal has intent to do damage. Okay? So those are the two ways that we are going to have to use to understand Hashem's will. It did means what he wants us to do with any situation. Okay? Either it's going to be written there in black and white, or we're going to have to derive it by using our seichel, our minds. Okay? So that's the first boxes that he has here. The laws are either derived mitzad hakasav or mitzad hasvara. Now, what does he mean mitzad hakasav? So first of all, if it's written there in black and white, so obviously Hashem wants us to do the law as it stated, ki yach mishor shorei, right? However, if it's not written in black and white, although it's there, it's called a remez. Now, we're not talking about in drush, Kabbalah, or anything like that. What does a remez mean? A remez means that it's not there spelled out in black and white, but it's there because of a kesher, smichus, or yitur lashon. See those three words there? Kesher, smichut, or yitur lashon. Translate the words. Kesher means a relationship, a link, a bridge. We'll explain exactly what he means here. He explains it. I'm just giving the overview because if I go right inside, you won't see the forest. You just look at all the leaves and get confused. So, kesher means a relationship. Smichus means a geographic placement on the page. In other words, if Hashem puts the law of Sota right next to the law of Cohen, saying Birkus Kohanim, so we can learn through the juxtaposition of those two concepts that just like the Sota had a problem with drinking, so actually the Nazir, I'm sorry, the Nazir can't drink yain, so the Kohen can't say Birkus Kohanim. Okay, good. So that's called juxtaposition, a fancy word. It just means that the geographic placement of two ideas are next to each other. The third one is called yitur lashon. Yitur lashon means that Hashem is using more words than necessary to communicate an idea. Now we know that Hashem doesn't create anything extra. Okay? They used to think the appendix was extra and they used to cut it out freely. And they used to think the tonsils were extra, they cut it out. Then they found out it was really part of a very subtle lymphatic system. So Hashem has a reason for everything that He created.
Okay. Still count the tonsils.
Excuse me?
They still count the tonsils. They still take out the tonsils.
Yeah, they still do if it gets infected so badly that they're not working or they're hurting your body, so they do take them out. But they used to do it as a, as a matter of fact. Okay, it was like preventative. Okay, but everything does have a function, but certain things malfunction. When they malfunction, they take them out. Okay. So whenever you see something that could be written in 2 words, and Hashem writes it with 3 words, so we don't say, well, Hashem was busy that day, right? What do we say? That extra word there's some meaning to it. That those tonsils, kiviyachol, have a purpose. We just didn't understand it before, right? So we have to look into why that extra word, or he's going to say even an extra letter, is there. Okay? So these are the three, what he calls ramazim, meaning it's not written black and white, but there is an indication in the physical black and white letters to teach us these other laws. Okay? So for instance, in Kesher, right? Kesher means the logical progression of ideas. Okay, so when I showed you, when we first started the class, we took Mishpatim 21 and 22, and we made a nice little chart. And we wrote down all the cases and all the laws. And lo and behold, we saw a very logical progression. The parsha starts out with a man murdering another man. Then it goes down to his property damaging other property, both men and then animals, and finally Aish, which is against his movable property, unmovable property. And then we got into Shomer, which means it's not even my animal that's doing the damage, it's something that I'm watching, which is another step away, telling me I'm even obligated as a Shomer to do the damage. Okay, so there's a progression from Homer to Kal in that situation. So we learn a lot of things from progression. So for instance, when two ideas are associated and they're next to each other, we're going to learn something. That's going to be different, as I'll explain to you in 1 second when we talk about smichus. There the ideas won't be related logically. I'll give you an example. The Mishnah in Kedushin says, "Ha'isha nichneis be'shlosha derachim." Because of starting. You want to get married, because of Hashem, someone you are, someone you will be. You're going to do it in one of three ways, kesef shtar. Now, shtar, which means you write on a document, you are married to me with this document, and you hand it to you say, "Hurry up and Kodesh leave with this document." She takes the document, she gets married. Well, that's interesting. The Torah doesn't say that in black and white, does it? Look at the Torah, it says, "Ki takishu bo'alel." Nikah, should be married. It's done by living together. It's not done by shtar. It's not done by kesser. Right? So it's not there in black and white. So we're going to have to now get that knowledge from another place. So when it comes to shtar, there's a pasuk in Gittin that says a man can divorce his wife with a document, and she shall go out and yotzei b'haisa and be with another man in marriage. So those two concepts are placed next to each other. And the Gemara learns that they're placed next to each other because the way she goes out, meaning with the document of divorce, is also the way she comes in, meaning she can get married with a shtar. Okay? So that means that when concepts are related to each other, we can now move information from one to the next. Now, the smichut, now that, because both of those concepts are talking about marriage, but if the concepts are not talking about the same issue, for instance, the Nazir and the Kohen giving a bracha, those things have nothing to do with each other, we still can learn information through the juxtaposition, and that's called smichut. And that's why we say that just like a Nazir can't drink wine, the Gemara explains, the Kohen can't have wine when he says Birchas Kohen. So that's called smichut. Now we hear the difference. One means that there's a logical connection between the two ideas, and they're associated to each other. And the other one means that there's no logical connection, they're just geographically next to each other on the page. Okay? So all these three methods, the kesher, the smichus, and the last one, yitur lashon. What's a great example of yitur lashon? How do we know, in our case, in Bava Kama, right, you want to pay for your damage? How do we know that you can use Shavei Kesef, not only Kesef? How do we know? There's an extra word in the English. What's the extra word? Yoshi. It says, Balabor Yishalom Kesef, Balabor Kesef, it says Kesef Yishalom, Yoshiv Lebala. It should have just said Kesef Yishalom Lebala. That would have been fine. 3 words, Kesef Yishalom Lebala. You should pay Kesef to the owner of the ox that you just killed and you bore, right? What does it mean? Kesef Yishalom Yoshiv Lebala. It's an extra word, right? Yashiv is an extra word. Don't need it. And we said Hashem doesn't do anything unless it's necessary. So the word Yashiv comes to include a tremendous connection. Then that not only can you give Kesed, but you can give Hashara. Anything that you give to him that has a monetary value with that, which is also good. That's cool. Yashiv L'Rav Hashara Kesed V'Achus. So that's not an extra word. Now, the extra language could be a word, it could even be one letter. One letter. An extra one letter can tell us a day. How do we know that? So the Gemara explains, again, it says that he should shalach, he sends the get, and then at the end of the pasuk, I wrote it down, unfortunately, this text, I printed this with Russian, I don't know the sources, but I'll tell you the sources. It says in that pasuk, shalach v'shalcha. It adds a hey to the word shalach. So the Gemara learns shalach means that he can send. There's an extra, first of all, there's three, there's shalach, shalcha, and shalach. There's 3 times shalach is mentioned in that pasuk. So one pasuk, shalach, says that he can make a shliach. And the extra hey, shalcha, is to tell us that she can make a shliach too. Shliach l'kabbalah. That's how they do it. So from one extra letter, a hey, because the Torah switched from the word shalach, and it should have just said shalach in the second verse, we're going to learn that not only he can be make a shliach for a get, but she can too. So that's called yitur lashon. The yitur lashon can be a whole word, like we have in Yashiv. It can be one little letter, like the hey. Okay. So that's the basic setup. He says when the Torah wants to teach us information, it does it either clearly or through remez. And the remez is either through this kesher slichus or yetur lashon. Now, let's look. That's all what he calls the first part of communication of dinim, which is called things that are written in the Torah. Okay. Now, the bottom part, the bottom chart is very interesting. Okay. First, I'm going to go to the left-hand side of the bottom chart. Okay, number 2, I'm going to skip number 1, and I'm going to explain that to you. It's going to be very, very exciting, but I just want to give you the overview that is the way we learn from the Torah is what's written there, number 1, and then what we can derive logically. That's called svara. So if you look at number 2, svara, he describes 2 ways that we learn through svara. One is called mi mishnah la mishnah, b'mamet sinu, and the other one is called mikal v'chom or michom mikal. We're able to extend the dinim in the chomish that we read by a method called mamet sinu or kal v'chom. What's the difference between a mamet sinu and a kal v'chom? Ever think about that? He's going to spell it out. I'm just giving you an overview. Okay? What's the difference between a method sinu and a kal v'chom? Okay? A method sinu is where we find a quality in what's written in the Torah, like Karen has the quality of kavanah lahazak, and we equate it to another nosei, another case, for instance, kicking, which also has that quality, and we make that, what we find here, kavanah lahazak, we find over here, mamet sinu, and therefore we make an equation, and we can move the din from what's written in the Torah over to what's not written in the Torah, but we can derive logically. Yeah? That's called a mamet sinu. That's an equation. The other type is called a kal v'chomer. Right? A kal v'chomer means that, and we spoke about this at length in some other classes, when we have this, even today I spoke about it, I mentioned, when we have this progression of cases, for instance, I give the classic case. You have a Kohen, a Levi, and a Yisrael. Who should have the most chomer dinim, those 3? The Kohen, the Levi, Yisrael. What? The Kohen. If there's a chomer din, we'd expect to find it in the Kohen, right? And if there's a cooler din, we'd expect to find it in Israel. And so it is. And what about the Kohen Gadol? Would he be more Mekel or more Machmir than a regular Kohen? The Kohen Gadol.
More Machmir.
More Machmir, obviously, right? So we have this progression. And we can start, once we line up the subjects from Chomer to Kal, like Kohen Gadol, Cohen, Levi, Yisrael, you can add the Eved, you can add under there, Cohen, right? So wherever Hashem tells us a din applies, we're now able through our minds to project that din either up or down the scale. What do I mean by up and down the scale? The Kohen Gadol can only marry a Basur, correct? That's very. What do we say about the regular Kohen? Does he have to marry a Basur?
The Kohen does have to marry.
Excuse me?
Yeah, compatible.
Exactly. He doesn't have to. Since the din was revealed in the most Chomer case, so we say it's only the most Chomer case that has that special din, nowhere else now, right? Let's go the opposite way around. A regular Jew can't marry a Mamzeres, correct? What about a Levi and a Kohen? Can he marry a Mamzeres? What?
If the words can't marry, then about
Exactly. And that's the principle of Kal V'chomer. Wherever the Torah told us the law, we can then project the law up and down the scale depending if it's a heter or a used. Okay? So those are the two ways that we learn. Now he explains the Kal V'chomer means an inequality that we're going to learn either up the scale or down the scale. Now the third way we're going to learn is very interesting, and he calls it occasion. Occasion. Occasion means when logically two things are not on a scale, not even done with each other, not even comparable to each other, yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to equate them. How does he tell us to equate them? With a method called Gezerah Shah. For instance, how do you know that you can marry or you married your wife or will marry your wife with a ring, with a kesed, right, with money? So there we have, it's not written, it's only written in the Torah. It doesn't say anything about kesed. Star, we know it. So the Gemara explains we have what's called the Gezerah Shah. In the pasuk of Avram Avinu, it says what? Avram buys a keva for his wife, and he says to Ephraim, he says, Nisati kesed asor kach mimeni. I'm giving you money for this field. Kach mimeni. Take it from me. Use the word kicho. In the pasuk of marriage, it says ki yikach ish es isha. When a man shall take his wife. So we have what's called the equivalent of those two kichos. Just like Avram Avinu used money to buy the kever, we can now use money to do the marriage ceremony. Okay. Now these two concepts are not logically connected. I can sell my field, but I can't sell my wife, right? So they're logical. They have no good logical connection. It's just that the Torah demands that when we do the marriage, the act of marriage, that we use a physical act in order to do it. But the acquiring of a field and acquiring of a wife have nothing to do logically with each other.
Why does it put it in Svarim? Why does it put it in Svarim?
Oh, very good. Excellent. I'll explain that. Excellent question. I'm glad you asked. The method that we're going to use is called a hekesh, which is a logical connection, but the connection that we're going to use is not going to be logical. Let me explain that. I have to explain that a little, okay? When it comes to the relationship of Karen, which is Kavan Lahazik, and Be'ita, or Revitza, there's a logical connection between the two ideas. Both of them are Hezek, and both of them are doing damage from the same time, the same reason. When it comes to a hekesh, what we're doing formally is comparing two subjects and moving information over. But the link between subject A and subject B is not going to be by logic. So we're formally going to link two concepts together. In other words, we're not looking at the words here to do it, we're looking at the concepts. But the way we're linking them together is not because they're logically related, but because we have a special halacha motion Sinai that they're logically related. So it looks in form like we're making an equation and moving A to B, but the equation is only because of this artificial connection, okay? So it's a logical process, meaning if this case plays with Kesed, and this is equal to that case, then it's going to play with Kesed equal. So it's a logical connection, but the way that the things are connected is halacha motion Sinai. You couldn't do this. That's why it says that it's asa to darsh a zerusha. You can't say, because it says this word here and it says a word, I'm going to move the concept over. You cannot. You can do that with sneakers, you can do that with all the other methods. Okay, so it's a logical connection, but meaning that it works formally to connect two subjects and move the din, but the basis of the connection of the two subjects is okay? That's all he means. All right. Now, if we look at the second part of the, and I'll also answer you another way, just sort of now. There's no indication at all in the negative that a woman can be married with Kesed. It there's no extra word there, there's no extra letter, there's no indication of Kesed at all. The word Hikah, Kesed, means to take, it does not take anything from Kesed. So there's nothing written in English that would indicate that you can marry a woman with Kesed. So we're going to have to make a link between the two ideas, and that link is going to be a halacha motion Sinai. Okay? So what he says is, the first thing you have to know when you're analyzing any case, any law in the Chumash, you're looking at the cases there, you have to see what's written in black and white. And you have to look if there's any extra words and extra letters. But your understanding of what the law is going to be based by you seeing some physical evidence. But when you're talking about svara, you're going to move laws around that are not at all mentioned in the Chumash at all. The Ita, Revitza, there is no indication, Mefarish, in those words that I have to pay. So you're going to actually create a din in a place where there's no words at all. Okay? So that's the idea of svara. Means the first part means you have some sort of physical evidence in the Chumash itself that tells you that this is the law. Okay? If I ask you, Karen, it says plus Mefarish, almost before it says, right? So I have words, and it tells you you have to pay. So it talks about a shore, it talks about okay, we have to show it's Karen, but we do that. But okay, so it does talk about Karen Mefarish, but there's no indication for Revitza or in the physical words. So that has to be derived, and that's called svara. Now the svara could be a logical connection, or it could be a halacha motion Sinai. Now, these halacha motion Sinai are very limited. I asked for Shiur Cohen. He told me, I asked him, how many years there Shavs of Shas? Shiur Cohen knows all of Shas. I told you many times, like you can count the papers in front of you, he knows how many times Abaya is mentioned in Shas. I said to him, because I teach, how many Gezerah Shavs are there in Shas? So he looks at me and he says, if Rev Kanevsky can answer that question, how do you want me to answer that question? That's what he told me. He said, but I'll tell you, there's more than 100. Why couldn't he tell me exactly how much? Because there's a lot of machlokes. And then he told me there's a lot of Gezerah Shavs that we've lost. Okay, we only have the ones that are indicated, and even those some of them are problematic. As far as, is it really Gezerah Shav or anything? But that's what he tells me. Okay, there's more than that. But you're not allowed to make linguistic links between similar words. You have to have Allah, Moshe Messina. That means Moshe had to hear it from Hashem and pass it down to Yeshiva, the whole line till today. Obviously, if you could do that thing you could make a relationship of two different laws, and two different cases and move laws over, so the word "et" appears everywhere. I'm sure I have for the direct object. So if that was a method that one could use to derive laws, you end up very quickly in one big mess. There's practically no pasuk without it, right? Okay, so that's limited. So it's not written, it's derived, but the way it's derived is halacha Moshe Sinai, and it has the format of a comparison of two ideas, but those ideas are not logically compared to a special Vera. Okay. Yes. Now, on the right-hand side, and the reason why I'm not doing this inside is if I did it inside, we would only accomplish a few lines. So I'm trying to give you an overview. The Ezra Hashem, next week, I would suggest that you read the text yourself, and then I'll read the text with you because it's very, very important to see what he says, okay, in detail. It's not, he doesn't write very well. Okay. The next size, when it comes to pasuk, is very, very dramatic. And this is really why I wanted to present this to you, because when the learning patterns are very important. He says that there's a relationship between svara and pasuk. He just told you there's things that are written or things that are derived. They're either derived logically or formally not, or they're derived, but that's derivatives. Or it's written there clearly. But on this left-hand side, when he says pasuk, he says a very interesting thing. If I were to ask you, why does Hashem write a law in the Torah? So you'll tell me, of course, he has to write it because how am I supposed to know it? So he says it's not that simple. Actually, he has to write the law in the Torah because you would come to the opposite conclusion. And you ever see a book called Chidushei Haran, Chidushei Harashbo? You ever see those books? Right? Well, there's a bigger book called Chidushei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chidushei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Meaning, if he didn't write it, you, and not the guy who's going to Aristotle, Bill Gates, whatever you think is the greatest guy, greatest guy in the world, you know what I mean? It wouldn't get to it. So Hashem is writing a book of Chidushim and he writes the Torah. That means, if you could figure anything out, either because it's simple, everyone knows that, or because it's learned in another pasuk, so Hashem doesn't have to waste his time, correct? So it must be that every pasuk, every word, every letter that you're going to see is a Kiddush that you wouldn't know from any other source. That's his first move. Not many people are privileged to understand what you just wrote. It's dramatic. Now, if I could make that a little more real to you. I have a relative, unfortunately, who's not exactly religious, not religious at all, says to me, doesn't call me Reb, says, why does the Torah say I can't take ribas? I can't take interest. Obviously, you see the Torah, it's ridiculous. I can't do it. And I'll prove to you I should take ribas. Why not? Look, I loan you my car, right? You pay me for it, right? Right? I loan you any of my drill. I pay you for renting. It's called renting, right? So I'm renting you money. Just another commodity. Good cash. So it's a kiddush of the Torah. I said, you're right. There's no rational reason why you shouldn't take interest. So then why does Hashem say don't take interest? Because there's something called the Jewish fraternity. Did you ever hear it?
No.
The Jewish club. He says for your friendly Jews, you got to be super nice. You got to go beyond. It's not just be nasty to non-Jews, not at all.
The biggest
But for Jews, you have to go out of your way and do chesed and to help people out. And ribis oftentimes ends up that the person usually is borrowing. You can borrow for business, but usually he's borrowing because he needs money. It's hard for him to pay back and stuff like that. So it's just help the guy out and do chesed. That's an extra kiddush of the Torah. What do you want to say?
Just said the religious Arabs, the whole Saudi Arabia, don't take over from anyone.
Religious Arabs?
And the non-Jews. The Muslims in Saudi Arabia, the biggest bank in London is the Saudi Arabian bank, and they refuse to take over from anyone. Non-Jews, Jews, anyone, Muslims, one of the biggest banks in London.
First of all, to bring a proof from an Arab,
the multi-billionaire,
a multi-billionaire can be Bill Gates, I don't care who he is, has nothing to do with the Torah. Now, it so happens that the Torah was only given to us because it says, Chachma b'goyim, tamid. Torah b'goyim al tamid. Now, that's an example of one, Torah b'goyim al tamid. They, meaning the Christians and later on the Muslims, took the written word. Actually, what happened was we have a fast day for that. We normally don't do it. In Greek, the Torah is called the Septuagint. 70. Why is it called the 70? Chazal explains to us that the Talmud, the Greek king, decided that he wants to know what's in the Torah. It used to be the Torah was like, strange document with strange letters. They find these things in the ground, steel, cuneiform, and all these, what's that called, picture writing, what's that called, the hieroglyphics, wow. So the Torah used to be a mystical document. And a non-Jew, to him it was like, radiate, I don't know what's going on. I can't even, So Tom says, look, I'm an intellectual person, I want to read what's in your, but I don't know Hebrew and I don't understand it, so translate it. But I'm afraid you guys won't translate it correctly, so I'm going to take 70 of your best Talmudei Chachamim, and I'll put them in separate rooms. I'm going to have you translate the Torah. What happens at the end? You read 70 documents from the beginning to end, and they're all the same. Next. Not only are they all the same, they all have the same mistakes in it. Because the people, the Talmud Chacham knew the Goyish Cup couldn't understand certain things. So they changed the text so the Goyish Cup could understand. The problem is that once the Gemara says, once the Gemara is written in Greek and then moved to Latin and then moved to French, English, all the other languages, so people thought they understood what's in the Torah, just as I started out. Even a 7-year-old could read the Torah. So they understood what's in the Torah. So the Torah says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So if someone damages someone's eye, what do? Check it out, kill him. Yeshua came into Eretz Israel. What did he do to all the idols in Eretz Israel? Smashed them. Boom, boom, wow. The CNN would have said about that. So what does ISS do? Whatever those guys, where they call themselves? The Islamic State. Crash, boom, boom. We're doing what the Torah says. Unfortunately, the Torah wasn't given to them. So whatever they do, whether it's nice, without rivers, okay, or whether they're killing people like they did today in New York, is mishugas. Torah b'goyim al tamid. Why? Because they don't have Torah Shabbat there. So anything they have is concepts that they push into the Torah, and they say, well, I like it. So that's what the Torah says. What did we say on Har Sinai? Na'aseh Nishma. What did the Goyim say? Nishma. Manasseh. If it fits into my concept package, I'll take it. But if it doesn't fit in my concept, so you can't bring me a riot. That was a long discussion on what the Arabs do correctly or incorrectly. Because if they do something correctly, they're doing it because they read it in a translation. Not even a translation when it comes to the Arabs. They couldn't even write. You know that. Muhammad couldn't sign his name. He got a priest and a rabbi to write the Quran. He's an intellectual moron. Maybe I'll get in trouble. Okay, but that's the reality. Everyone knows it. Yimak Shemo was a Jew, and he wrote nothing. Afterwards, they made up all sorts of stories about him. His disciples, they couldn't sell it to the Jews, so who did they sell it to? The Goyim. And they actually did something good to the Goyim. The Goyim used to have, what were the stadium with the animals beating up the other people. Pretty barbaric. The arena is pretty barbaric, you know. So they read the Chumash. I'll tell you a nice story. Recently, they told a justice in America that he has to take down the Ten Commandments from in front of his courthouse because of separation of church and state. So he says to the people who said that. In the end, right away, they took it down. But he said, look, I don't care what you say about church and state, but I know the people that come before me in justice. This one steals. This one does adultery. This one does it. They need to know the Ten Commandments. So Baruch Hashem, they're going about the Ten Commandments, and they became a little more civilized. However, they don't have Torah Shabbat Peh, so whatever they do never turns out straight. They never have. That's why you have wonderful things like crusades, right? They killed the Balei Tosfos, millions of Jews. You have Maximum World War II. You have the Spanish Inquisition. You have all these things. They're reading the Torah, my friend. Isabella was a great Christian. And what did she do? Destroy all the Jews. So you can't bring me any riots from what the Goyim do or don't. Sometimes they do. It says in the Torah, sometimes they do. It's not said in the Torah, there's no riot. Okay? We are different than the Goyim because we are doing Torah Shabbat Peh, which means that we have the exact definitions of what Hashem wants us to do. We're not going to make these mistakes in grand parts of Hashem. We're not going to do that. No, we're not. Because the Torah says, us. Okay. So because we have it, but our point is, our problem is, as Jews, is to understand the system. So here is the beginning of the system. Okay. So I just brought up rivers to show that whatever the Torah says to us, this is Chidushei Hashem. Look at it as Chidushei Aran, Chidushei Arin, right? Chidushei Ritvo. The Chumash is Chidushei Hashem, which means that if you were to, whatever you see written there has to be written there. Because if it wasn't written there, you would have thought opposite or different. Okay? So the Torah is always, every sentence and every letter, every word, every letter is there to tell you some new information that you couldn't learn either from simple logic, simple understanding, or from any other place in the Torah, by the way. Right? For instance, it says, Shnei Pesukim Amayim Ki'acharei Lomde. If two Pesukim, you can learn one from the other, and Hashem writes something you didn't have to write, that becomes now leave. It's a big Kiddush. Okay, so the basic rule number one, where it says Kasa, is like this. If you look at Aleph, in Svarim and Bichutz, there's two types of Svarim and Bichutz. One's called Mukhrach. Ain't a Mukhrach, we're on the Mukhrach side. If the Svarim and Bichutz is Mukhrach, means absolutely that's what you would say is a healthy, moral person, then the Torah is coming, or it's learned from one of the Shloshis or Amigos, or from some other apostle. So then you have two approaches, okay? The first approach is that what's being said here has to be different. Now let's give you a practical example. The Mishnah in Baba Kama, how does it start off? Lo hare hashor, kahare mama, lo hare hashor. Why does the Mishnah have to tell us lo hare hashor, kahare mama, lo hare hashor? You ever think of that question? Maybe Shiur gave that question. Okay? The Gemara talked about the question. The Gemara says, my command. It says, Lisnei Chada. Learn one of them, learn the shore, for instance, and I want the Mama, learn the Mama and the shore. Hashem is writing an extra word, Lord. So the Mishnah in shorthand is telling you the conclusion. It's telling you, don't think that you can learn shore from Mama and Mama from shore, because there's an essential difference, and therefore the Torah had to write both. Okay? So if I could have learned Mama from shore, I could not learn any Torah. I would not be able to move that din anything. Right? So comes along the Mishnah and tells us they're essentially different. And therefore, I can now extend this din of paying for damages to other cases. Okay? Now, what I'm trying to do with you, I hope you appreciate everything about these things, is to show you the underlying process that the Torah and the Gemara Torah is doing. And that's what he's trying to show us. We're not just reading words and gathering information. The Chazon Ish said one of the biggest problems that people have in learning is they think they're reading a letter. What do you mean they read a letter? That's the language. It means when you read a letter, someone else says, hi, how are you, where are you? There's nothing exceptional in the letter. Whatever it says, it says. Please send me $300 for this or do that. Whatever it says, it says. There's nothing underneath the letter. You don't turn it on the side with a secret code, right? So people think when they read the Chumash, and even if they read the Gemara, just a question of understanding language and understanding words. It's just a letter from Hashem, God, His love letter to the Jewish people. But what they don't understand is that this letter is not written in normal language. It's written in a very scientific, compact language. And that's where they make the mistake. Because they don't realize the exactitude and the systems that align underneath. So the Ezra Hashem, I know I'm talking a lot, I usually don't like to talk so much, but it's a very important introduction because with this basis, when we go into studying the simple halacha in the Mishnah, which the Mishnah just says very innocently, very simple words. Kids 8 years old can do that. What you have to begin to appreciate is what went underneath that word. What went in to make that word appear in the Mishnah. And what made that word appear in the Mishnah was a very complex interaction between Gezerah Shavas, Binyanavs, Kalvachomers, Yukim, Ramazan. So we're taking the Yeshiva and we're giving you a look deeper, okay? And that look deeper requires someone who wrote down some sort of systematic information so that we can handle it. And Baruch Hashem, Rebbe Sukkot from did that for us. So it takes a little time to express it, and I would suggest that you go over it, think about it. And I have the text here, by the way. All I did in the text was, he writes this way, right? All the great portion. So all I did was I formatted the text and broke it down into his little subcategories. But please read it, because that's when you really begin to appreciate it. And then when you're learning, ask yourself, is what he says really happening now on the stage? And lo and behold, you're going to see beautiful, deep, profound understanding of the clarity of what you're learning.